Hey guys, I was asked how about star signs and toxicity? Do certain star signs are they more toxic or not? It depends for whom because you have the circle of the zodiac, the birth charts circle. So you have all the 12 star signs in the circle, and when you put and then you have triangles. For example, the water triangle, the earth triangle, the fire triangle, and those are usually very compatible with each other. Interestingly enough, for me as a Cancer, the most compatible is Scorpio and Fish, which is exactly in that triangle. And every time I meet a Fish or a Scorpio, it's the perfect energetic fit, 100%. So, and then there are certain aspects of star signs which are for me kind of toxic. Toxic in the sense, not in the sense that they have to be toxic metaphremists. They can be very nice people, but I mean toxic in the sense that I cannot relate to them. It's not really toxic. It's just a different way of thinking. So, for example, for me, it's important how I feel. For a Leo, it's important how they are perceived. It's just a totally different energy. But what sometimes can happen that a Leo starts toxic metaframing you because you don't act the way they want you to. So, for example, they're like, "Oh, can't you see the way you're dressing? You're gonna be perceived horribly." Okay, that's one way, for example. Whereas I'm like, "Hey, it's more important what I feel." But if they can use this kind of characteristic they have within themselves to toxic metaframe you, so there is a possibility that that happens. Um, but it's not a guarantee. For me, there are certain star signs I just don't like to be too much around. For example, a Gemini for me is changing all the time, which is very bad for a relationship. For any kind of deeper relationship for Cancer, because the Cancer needs security in the emotions and stuff like that, and a safe home. And then the Gemini just wants to experiment all the time and try new things. So these kind of things you can be aware of. They're not necessarily toxic. It's just incompatible. Toxicity is really when somebody uses their kind of necessities, their character, and they project it onto you and require you to do that. For example, or you're not as outgoing as I am, or you're too introvert. Those are toxic metaframes. And then it can also go into gaslighting and narcissism. And I made the mistake. I once had a friend who was a Leo, and he would, we wouldn't get into a club, and he was like, why didn't we didn't get into a club? And I was like, no, why? Because the way you look. Okay, so that might have been a fact. Okay, but in general, it's between friends. It's a toxic metaframe. Definitely was a way of putting me down. At that time, I didn't know what toxic metaframing was and toxic behavior and toxic people, so I couldn't deal with that properly. And but now I know. So yeah, so the answer to star signs is that they all have different characteristics, and and they might use it for toxic metaframing. They don't necessarily have to. But Leos, for example, I was toxic metaframed by a lot of Leos. And But there's some star signs which naturally don't toxic metaframe as much. For example, a Libra will rarely toxic metaframe. Yeah, but in general, actually, yeah. But it depends like what surfaces in the interaction of two people. What surfaces?